Welcome to Broker's Playbook. Today I have the great pleasure of welcoming Mr. Phil Soper, President and CEO of LePage Canada, Canada's largest real estate brokerage with over 20,000 agents across the country. He's going to be sharing the insight that he brings to the table, and that is high-level economic stats, where the temperature of the real estate industry is today. We're going to be speaking to some of the problems that are causing this crazy housing shortage. And of course, lastly, what we can all do as our part to assist in addressing it. Stay tuned for a great episode ahead. Welcome back to Broker's Playbook podcast. I have the immense pleasure of welcoming my captain, President and CEO of LePage Canada, Mr. Phil Soper, to Broker's Playbook once again. And we're going to be really bringing together three major topics today. One is going to be where the market is today. We are effectively on the rebound and the recovery cycle in the Canadian economy. We have just experienced the very first rate cut in 4 years. So we thought it was appropriate to bring in the voice of real estate in this country, which is Mr. Phil Soper. Secondly, we're going to be dissecting what technology and AI specifically are bringing to the table for the business. And last but not least, some tips on leadership from the guy who's leading the biggest real estate company in Canada and has been doing so for over 20 years. Welcome to Broker's Playbook, and Phil, welcome to the show.
Thank you. What a pleasure to be back, Simeon. Thanks for having me.
My man, I'm super excited for today's conversation. I've also had the privilege of watching you shoot your exclusive playbook a few moments ago. And that is the newest part of Broker's Playbook family. It's the community, and that's content exclusive for the community members.
Yeah, very exciting. Happy to share.
And I mean, it was invaluable, and I can't wait to have our editing team get that all prepped and up for the community. For those who haven't joined the community, please take a look at the links all around this content. You will find your way there, and the value is incredible as to the type of content and who the content is coming from. You'll find tremendous value in it. Without further ado, Mr. Soper, you're on TV, you're in the papers, you're all over the place for your complete insight, consistent insight, on obviously the economy, housing, and how those two react to the consumer. LePage specifically is well, I'm not sure if it is the only, but one of the only that I'm aware of that brings actual surveys and data from the consumer into our world.
Yeah, we have been tracking the Canadian real estate industry for decades, well before my time. That data is invaluable. It's been used in the RBC Affordability Index. The Bank of Canada uses it in its analysis of the economy. So yeah, it's something we do as Canada's real estate company.
So with that being said, I want to get right into it. This show is industry facing, but we do have a lot of the investor community watching it. Sure. Because they're in the business of real estate too. So speaking to our brothers and sisters in the business, speaking to the investor community, what is the temperature of the market today? I mean, there's been a horrible perception as to where things are. I don't share the same sentiment. Sure, it's been a grind.
Yep.
However, that's business as far as I'm concerned. Give us your temperature and where you see things are going for myself, our colleagues, in the business.
Sure. So overall, big picture, housing remains one of the most reliable industries to invest in for the future. It's one of the most reliable industries going forward for the Canadian economy overall. Why? Well, because we're one of the few advanced nations on earth that has the growing need for housing. Number one is immigration, of course. We've welcomed well over 1 million new people last year, both immigrants and temporary residents like foreign students who hope to become permanent residents or Canadians. But there's a couple of other subtleties as well. One is our households are getting smaller. So if you go back to our grandparents' age, there was an average of 6 people per household in Canada. When I was a kid, it was 4. We're down to 2, and it's been falling. So what does that mean? Just mathematically, if nothing else changed, there was no immigration, whatever, the population was just completely flat, we'd need twice as many homes if there was 2 people per home versus 4. And as I say, it's declining. More single people in homes, not waiting to be married or partnered before the home.
See, that's an incredible insight, and I want to go back to it to really let that sink in. Declining population is creating the need for more homes.
the declining size of the family unit.
Got it.
People are having a lot fewer children, but they still want their own,
of course,
home. So that's one little thing that doesn't get talked about. The other one is the nasty baby boomers, very wealthy generation, but they don't have kids anymore. They are, by definition, at their ages, empty nesters, with the exception that have that 45-year-old still playing Xbox in the basement. Yeah, but put that aside. You know, most baby boomers are empty nesters, yet they own more family homes, which LePage defines as 3 or more bedrooms, than all the Gen Xers and millennials combined. So they're not moving on. Supposedly, they would have, by this stage, downsized, rolled the family home inventory to younger generations. But they're working longer, living longer, their health span when they're engaged in doing things is longer, and they have a lot of toys. And they like their big houses, and the kids might come and visit, you know, so they feel justified hanging on to them.
So you just saying that and looking into my own family, like my father-in-law, and this is a home in Mississauga, 3,500 feet, the typical home in Mississauga, in any of the suburbs, anywhere in Canada for that matter, and it's 80% empty. Nobody's there, but they would never, and he said, and I quote, "They will carry me out of here."
Right.
Because I could never be in a condo. Where do I put my stuff? So what you're saying is, in fact, lived by, and I think anybody will resonate with this. They're doing this.
Absolutely. So we have a need for more housing because society's needs have changed. People are living longer. People are living in smaller family units. And add to that, we're, kind of in a, they win one year, we won another year, race with Australia as the most successful country on the planet in terms of the economic impact of immigration. So we're bringing the best and brightest from around the world, and of course they have to be housed. So a rising tide raises all ships. We're in an industry that's going to need brokerage services. Now, we bring it right down to what we're talking about today. We've come through the largest or the longest market correction we've had since the early 1990s. So, 30 years. This was a biggie. So if your investor clients, if the other agents and Broker's Playbook out there are thinking it's been a tough 2023, that it was. But the tide is clearly, it's changed. Everything is growth. And I will say, particularly when you look outside of Toronto and Vancouver, things are growing across the country. Prices are rising, and the number of transactions are growing ever so slowly.
Well, thank you for that. First and foremost, it's good to know that huge high level insight and some of the reasons that I never even thought of before.
Sure.
That you're bringing to the table. That's so interesting because they're holding on to homes. That's all the inventory. It's
exactly.
It's an incredible thing that's not talked about. So thank you for bringing that forward. We're going to take a quick break, and I'm going to come back to speak a little bit about Toronto and Vancouver.
Okay.
Because Canada overall is actually doing much better, exactly as you said. But Toronto and Vancouver are getting,
yeah,
they're taking
been tougher.
They're taking
most expensive markets.
They're taking a pounding because they took the majority of the spoils during that big uplift.
Well said.
There's a price to pay, and we're going to talk about it right after the break. Welcome back to Broker's Playbook. I am here with Phil Soper, and we are diving deep. We're going into Vancouver. We're going to Toronto, our biggest urban markets. People have major concerns. They feel the two biggest markets in Canada are punishing them. It feels the city is raising development charges in a time where affordability is at its worst.
Yeah, we can't forget about the new federal
capital gains.
Yeah, capital gains, change the capital gains inclusion rate, the higher taxes.
So let me put it this way. We have all levels of governments, politicians specifically, standing on the rooftops, talking about affordability and how much they care about housing and affordability thereof. Yet the actions of, and I'm talking about all three levels of government, municipal, I'm talking about provincial, and I'm talking about federal, each bringing their own layers of additional costs that further exasperates
the housing supply crisis in this country.
At the same time, the interest rates, which is a completely different bag of problems that we cannot ignore. We can't have inflation spiral out of control. I guess we do need to fix it. It looks like we got there finally. We have that immense pressure not allowing housing to work as an investment. So in a country where housing is in an absolute crisis, supply itself, we need 1.5 million homes in the next decade to even have a chance of seeing a normal balanced market. And let's start there.
Sure.
Let's start there. What is your take specifically to government charges as late as first week of June of this year? The GTA saw yet another development charge increase. And at the end of June, we're seeing capital gains go through the exemption, go up to 2/3. Tell me your thoughts.
The left hand isn't talking to the right hand. We've got in every government, municipal, provincial, federal, as you said, you've got people focused on creating new sources of revenue to spend on other government programs. And you've got people that are quite right for political gain, because it's one of the hottest topics in politics today and will remain so for the rest of the decade, who are forwarding policies that are supposed to increase the number of homes we're building. Because you're quite right, Simeon, we've got a huge deficit in the number of homes we need in this country. So we need to get all sides of government working together in all levels of government.
Do you believe that the investor community, because we shared some data earlier as to where the inventory is and how an entire generation may be holding a big wave of stock of inventory under, the guise of their comfort,
baby boomers,
and they have the right to do so.
Sure,
all stuff aside, do you believe that the investor community or speculation is driving this problem, or how do you see that?
No, end user end user demand, whether it's for rental purposes. So you could say that an investor who is to become a landlord and supply housing for the 1/3 of Canadians who are renters, that is a legitimate and much needed element. And ultimate end users, people who want homes so they can move into them and house their families, that's where the demand's coming from. Speculation is a tiny slice of the market. We used to, like in this country, politicians would blame foreign investors. It was never, even at the peak in high-end neighborhoods in Vancouver, never ever got to double digits in terms of the number of homes that were being purchased. So it was never the heart of the problem.
I thought that was just an easy targeted move for rhetoric.
Scapegoating.
It was scapegoating. It was rhetoric to sound like the problem is not us. The problem is over there. And it's coming from the outside where, in fact, it was nowhere near the severity that they discussed.
We need to build more homes that are not rising rapidly in cost, and we need to do so quickly. So we need to reduce cycle times. We need to take some of the burden of risk off the shoulders of developers. And we need to do so fast, because every year, every month that we don't do something, we get farther behind. And the country is looking for proposals.
So I'm going to go down a path, because I was very blessed to attend an event in this last week, downtown Toronto. It was held at a conference center where 40 of the country's biggest developers were all in the same room. We were fortunate, myself and my partner were fortunate to have a seat at the table where, and this was not recorded. It wasn't for content. It wasn't for anything. This was brainstorming, masterminding, where people put down their walls. These are competitors. These are the biggest developers in the country.
The greater good.
For the greater good, to see kind of, where's everybody's head at? Like, how are we doing here?
Were they optimistic?
I'm going to have to say overall, it was more to the negative than it was to the positive.
Okay, not surprising.
And I'm not even going to say negative. It was more realistic to money being so expensive.
Yep.
Carrying projects is becoming a very big issue.
Yep.
So there's going to have to be some leaning up to do across all fronts in that world, to the point where they believe just by the times, construction costs are going to come down, because that boom where everybody was charging whatever they wanted is over. That run where they had the materials and costs had risen so much. So there is some good coming out of it. The slowdown in economy overall is going to bring some construction costs down.
And
so that's a good
any
thing.
Proposals? Did you have any ideas that the group latched on?
So I have some ideas. They have the biggest problem in the room is development charges. So government development charges, between parkland levies, development charges, infrastructure, all the different layers, they sum up to an astonishing number. And when I say astonishing, this is never talked about in the papers. Sure. Politicians who are responsible for this never speak of it. And of course, they don't speak of it because it doesn't sound nice.
No.
But government is responsible, 3 levels, municipal, provincial, and federal, make up nearly 30% of any given price tag for new construction.
That's ridiculous.
So,
but it's also an opportunity, because if you address that, you can't do anything about labor costs.
No.
You can't do anything about the cost of materials, but you could do something about the speed at which regulations were liberalized or changed to speed up, and the cost of those.
So the red tape, so that whole time is number one, and number 2 is development charges.
Wow.
So having a 10-year timeline for any given project is 7 to 10 years.
Right.
So we're talking about high-rise construction, Vancouver, we're talking Toronto, we're talking Montreal. So any of the mega sites that you're talking 300-400 doors or more, we're talking about 3 to 4 years in planning, 3 to 4 years in construction. That is impossible. It is embarrassing for Canada.
Well, and builders are borrowers too.
Of course.
So with the cost of money at multi-year highs, the longer it takes from concept to handing over the keys and actually seeing some cash for their investment, the greater their cost of carrying the project is.
But the whole point of what you just said is the fact that the more it costs the builder, they still have to profit.
Oh, they pass that directly on to the consumer,
consumer.
Which erodes housing affordability.
So with that being said, the proposals and the discussions in the room is, where do we go? How do we get the investor to believe that this asset class is not only safe, it's what the country actually needs? So I'm going to hit just the top 3 notes. We need 1.5 million homes built in the next decade. Right now, the trajectory of that, and we can lie about housing starts, we can skew the numbers in any way we want. I can tell you without an absolute doubt, fact, out of 70 projects that launched in the Greater Horseshoe in the last 12 months,
Southern Ontario,
70 projects last 12 months, 7 of them reached the trajectory in sales to get financing.
Wow.
Which means 7 out of 70 got it. That's 10%. 90% did not.
Of that critically needed housing in Southern Ontario, it's not going to happen.
If 90
or it's
projects,
going to be delayed.
It's going to be delayed and or canceled.
Yep.
Because you can only carry a project so long before it makes no more financial sense.
Yes.
So with 90% of that housing, and call it because of interest rate, call it whatever the excuse may be, it's the times.
So how do we help that 10% success rate move to 90% success?
How do we get the investors back? The
Yeah.
reason this housing is not going to be built is because the investor community, which fuels the construction of homes,
Right.
an end user cannot buy a home 5 years before they need it.
No.
It's 100% investor driven asset class.
Yep.
Pre-construction, whether it's low rise up north, whether it's condominiums in the core, pre-construction and new construction is an investor asset class.
So what can we do what can government do to help solve this problem?
So I think the main proposal is to take a look at development charge. So from a builder perspective, I have a perspective that I'll share in a second. From a builder perspective, they need those development charges to roll back.
Right.
They have to roll back. It's a part of their pro forma.
Governments need to look elsewhere to fill the government coffers. They can't keep going back to this source of revenue if they want to address housing affordability because of the housing.
That is absolutely correct.
Yeah.
And furthermore, so for the developer, it's rolling back some of those variable costs that are destroying their balance sheets, because they have to win. If the developer's not winning, the community's not winning.
No, I mean they're
Period.
They're not into this as a charity.
My take is on something that we discussed earlier. To bring the investor community back, we have to make sure that the investor can win.
Right.
This is,
and not egregiously, windfall, just a reasonable return on investment.
the latest legislation just passed
Capital
for the capital gains
yeah.
exemption to go up from half, 50% to 2/3. I don't agree with it personally as an investor myself, but I understand the reasons why Canada needs to raise capital. And if that's the way it needs to go, so be it. But you cannot expect to solve a housing crisis that needs investment. It needs retail investors like me and you.
Yep.
Like our children in the future, like our friends right now, to invest in real estate to create those housing starts.
Yep.
When you take away more, there is no reason left.
Well, there's fewer people who will do it.
And in this case, 90% won't. So we already have the data in front of us. My request, and I'm going to get pretty loud about this.
Sure.
My request in our whole community is I'm going to get our army of agents to lobby, to get loud about it. We need the government to incentivize investors if we want to bring 1 million homes into the market.
Right, into Southern Ontario.
And I don't know how that can be done. I'm not an economist. I am a broker, in a business person. But if it was up to me, from an easy way that I see is on new housing, give the investor an exemption, no capital gain tax, or 30%, not 50, not 66, 30%. Give them a win.
And how long does the investor typically hold a property in Canada?
Well, like with new construction, typically you'll have the whole construction period. They close on it. They wait for the building to stabilize. So it's rented, everybody's moved in, all the projects are complete. So call it 2 to 3 years of ownership, right. And then it flips hands.
So you're suggesting that for that period, the initial investor, which is providing the capital, get these projects done to build Canada's much needed housing, be incented with a lower capital gains tax, so more of them do it, and we get not 10% of those projects green lighted, but 20, 50.
Yeah, and I mean, if we can have him, and for example, if we have him flip that property to an end user in year one, the cap rate is at the lowest. So we incent him to flip it to an end user as soon as possible. Don't hold on to it.
A family who needs housing.
That's right. Second year, third year, and if he keeps it for 5 or more years, hit him with 66% or whatever.
Devil in the details, but the concept I think is brilliant.
So that is kind of where the discussions went. That's kind of where I see a solution that could have an immediate impact in a community of investors now that's being punished daily. I think that could be a solution.
I hope policymakers are tuned in to Broker's Playbook.
Let's get loud about it.
Okay.
Let's take a break. That was a lot. I hope you're resonating with a conversation. We'll be back in just a few minutes. Welcome back to Broker's Playbook. I am here with Phil Soper, and we're talking high-level economy. We're talking how to look at addressing this housing crisis and specifically the supply, how to get investors back to the table. If Doug Ford, if our Prime Minister, if our Minister of Housing was listening to this last section, how do you think they could react, and how could you as an industry leader complement this entire thing?
Well, I think firstly, we have to recognize that it is an incredibly complex problem that takes coordination across between private industry, various groups, us in the brokerage community, the developers, but also all levels of government. And there has to be, quote unquote, something in it for everybody. So, for example, at the federal level, we've had a bump up in the capital gains inclusion rate, and this is going to impact the development of new housing. So what tax incentives, and in our last segment, you forwarded a very solid idea, could be put in place to negate the what is going to be a drag on housing starts. And we need to look right across all areas of public policy to just say, not just what money you're throwing at the segment to try to incent building, but where are all the areas that governments are acting as a barrier to development. And I don't think we're doing that.
I couldn't agree with you more. Lead times are still extremely high, and that's in British Columbia, in Ontario, in Quebec. These are all extremely heavy bureaucratic provinces with long history of policy and very resistant to change. We do have policymakers in place right now that are pushing for it. I do hope they succeed for all intents and purposes. As the president and CEO of Canada's biggest national real estate company, what do you see as a possible national solution when you get together with some of these head of banks and You guys are sharing insight. What are some of the ideas that take place that you can share with us from a national perspective?
Let me just give you one example. We're building homes today in much the same way we built them 100 years ago. I believe that there are fascinating new developments underway in various parts of the world, particularly the United States and Europe.
Are you referring to modular?
Yeah, modular and even 3D printed structures. So if you look at, I was at a session recently that looked at a California company that was using industrial scale 3D printing to build homes. A fraction of the cost and time to put the home up, and they could pull the whole thing together with a zero carbon footprint intent, so which made big impacts in California. There's projects underway in Texas. You know, here in Canada, we have brilliant engineers at our universities. We have architects that are full of ideas. Why aren't we investing in ideas that could be world beaters in terms of reducing the time and cost it takes to build a home?
As well as environmental impact by the sounds of it.
And exactly, and meeting climate goals as well. So that should be on the table. And we should be funding it potentially out of some of the money set aside to bring us to net zero carbon in the middle of the century. Some of that should be focused on housing and addressing the affordability issue, the housing affordability issue, which is, at its core is a housing shortage issue.
So if the discussion in your boardrooms and your colleagues' boardrooms is forming as such, is there some noise or some escalation up the priority at government? Have you noticed that? Or is what you're saying is you are not noticing that becoming a priority?
The ideas are great. I'm impressed with the ideas coming out of the bureaucrats in Ottawa, in Queen's Park in Toronto, in Victoria, in from the provinces, from the feds. The problem is when it moves from the well-meaning, highly focused people in the bureaucracy and moves up to the elected officials, the governments, and then they start taking pot shots at each other. I look at a recent federal program that was designed to help reduce the not in my neighborhood, the anti-densification issues that we have in our communities. Understandably, local politicians, if you're representing a municipal riding and your citizens don't want it, it's hard for you as a politician to say, for the greater good, we need to have more of that.
So NIMBYism is still prevailing.
Oh, absolutely. So there were good ideas from the federal government, but because they came from the federal government, there are provinces, I'll pick on Alberta right now, that don't like anything to come out of Ottawa. So therefore, they're just
they don't.
No to it. So then you get a stalemate, and you even have municipal like mayors in Alberta saying, wait, I've got a housing crisis here. Remember, a lot of people are migrating to Alberta. I'll take the support, the financial support from Ottawa. I don't care whose idea it is or whose money. We just need to get people off the street. We need to put houses over our populations, or roofs over our population's heads. So we definitely need more people to just set aside their differences. I know, Pollyanna, and address the problem, which we did during COVID. So we'll do it for a health crisis. Why not for a housing crisis?
That's very interesting. In closing, for this specific segment, because I feel that we've brought some very big issues to the forefront, what can me and you, and I'm speaking to every single one of my colleagues across the country, there's a couple 100,000 of us.
Yeah.
What can we do? What can our clients do? What kind of advocacy can we promote to see some of this change hit the MPs, the elected officials potentially, what do you suggest?
Much more than any other stakeholder in the housing crisis in this country, realtors have a voice. Number one, there's lots of us, as you pointed out. Number two, as a community, we have platforms, call it social media platforms, in which we can move messages out to the marketplace and our clients, which are our voters and politicians. And so I believe that organized real estate, the Canadian Real Estate Association, the provincial associations, and realtors across the country need to be taking messages of collaboration and crisis mitigation to the street and talking positively about lowering barriers to solving our housing supply crisis. It can be done.
Mr. Phil Soper, I want to thank you so very much for your insight. I find that message resonates with me perfectly, and I will do everything I can to get loud about what you recommended. I am hoping everybody in our Broker's Playbook community really had a lot of takeaways from today's conversation. Our market is in a recovery. Our market will be recovering with the economy as rates come down, as activity intensifies in home building. We need to stay very alert. We need to stay knowledgeable, and we need to count on each other and collaborate to see change in this industry and to live a better industry. Until next episode, thank you for joining us. Phil, thank you for being on the show.
My pleasure.